I am 71 years old. I have worked with these hands since I was 14. I have carried heavy things, not just boxes, not just furniture, not just lumber, but grief and silence and the kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix. I built a house with my hands. I raised a son with my heart. I buried a wife with my tears. And I thought, after all of that I deserved at least some peace in my old age. But life sometimes has a different plan. What I am about to tell you happened 8 months ago. I have not spoken about it publicly until now. Not because I was ashamed, but because I needed time to understand it myself, to sit with it, to let the wound close a little before I pressed on it again. The night I heard my son's voice through that thin cabin wall, I felt something crack inside me, not my heart. My heart had already been broken and healed too many times to break easily. What cracked was my belief. My belief that I knew the people I loved. But here is what I also want you to know. Before we go any further into this story, I did not fall off that cliff. And my son, my own blood, the boy I taught to ride a bicycle, the boy I sat beside in the hospital when he had pneumonia at age 6, he is the one who fell, not from a cliff, but from the only thing that ever truly mattered, my respect. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Harold Eugene Mercer. Most people who know me just call me Jean. My late wife, Patricia, God rest her soul, she called me Jeannie when she was teasing me, and Harold when she was serious. You always knew which mood she was in by what she called you. I miss that. I miss her every single morning. The first 5 seconds after I wake up, when the world is still soft and quiet, and my mind hasn't fully turned on yet, those 5 seconds, I sometimes forget she's gone. And then I remember, and I greet the day with a small weight already sitting on my chest. Patricia died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast. 4 months from diagnosis to goodbye. We didn't even have time to be properly afraid. We only had time to hold hands and say everything we'd been saving for later. And then later ran out. We had one child together, our son Daniel, Danny, we called him when he was small. When he grew up and became a man with a career and a wife and opinions about everything, he became Daniel. He decided that himself. He said Danny sounded like a child's name, and he was not a child anymore. He was right about that. Daniel is 43 now. He works in finance. He wears pressed shirts and drives a car that costs more than my entire first house. He married a woman named Renee about 12 years ago. Renee is polished. That's the kindest word I have for her. She's the kind of woman who notices if your shoes are scuffed and mentions it in a way that sounds like concern but feels like a judgment. I tried to love Renee the way Daniel loved her. I tried for a long time. They have 2 children, my grandchildren. Marcus, who is 10, and little Sophie, who is 7. Those 2 children are the reason I still bother to put on a coat and go outside on cold mornings. They are the sunlight I get to stand in, even when everything else is shadow. After Patricia died, I stayed in the family home for about a year. Then the stairs started troubling my knees, and Daniel and Renee suggested very kindly, very reasonably, that I should come stay with them for a while. I should have listened to the feeling in my stomach that day. It felt like a small stone dropping into still water. But I pushed the feeling away. I told myself, this is my son, this is my family, this is love. I moved into their house in September, 2 years ago. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about disrespect within a family. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It creeps in like fog, slowly, quietly. And by the time you realize you can't see clearly anymore, you're already lost in it. First few months were fine. Daniel was attentive. Renee cooked proper meals and asked about my health. The grandchildren climbed on me and called me Grandpa Gene, and everything felt manageable. But then, gradually, things began to shift. Small things at first. I would come to the dinner table and Renee would sigh. Just a small sigh. The kind that said you're late again or here comes the problem without saying a single word. I started coming to the table earlier to avoid the sigh. I would sit and wait. And then Renee would come in and see me already sitting and say, "Oh, Jean, you didn't have to wait. We eat at 7. And I would say, "I know, I just wanted to be ready." And she would look at Daniel and something would pass between them that I was not meant to see, but always did. Then the comments started. Nothing huge, nothing you could point to and say, "That was cruel." They were small things. Like pebbles dropped one at a time into a bucket. You don't notice how heavy the bucket is getting until you try to lift it, and your arm gives out. "Dad, are you wearing that sweater again? It's looking a little worn." "Jean, the grandchildren need quiet time for their homework in the afternoons. Maybe you could watch your programs in your room." "Dad, when you tell those old stories at dinner, the kids tune out. Maybe keep it shorter." I kept it shorter. I moved to my room. I stopped wearing the sweater. I was becoming smaller and smaller in a house that my son had apparently decided I was taking up too much space in. And Daniel, my son, my boy, he said nothing. He never disagreed with Renee. He never turned to me and said, "Dad, ignore her. You belong here." He just ate his food and looked at his phone and let it happen. That silence hurt more than anything Renee said. Because Renee was someone I'd known for 12 years. But Daniel, I had known him since before he took his first breath. I was in that hospital. I heard him cry for the very first time. I was the one who told Patricia, "He's perfect. He's absolutely perfect." And now he couldn't look me in the eye at the dinner table. I told myself, "He's busy. He's stressed. The job is hard. Marriage is complicated." I told myself a lot of things. 7 months ago, I had a health episode. Nothing catastrophic. A dizzy spell that turned into a fall. I was in the kitchen, reaching for a glass on a shelf that Renee had rearranged so the glasses were higher up than before, and I felt the world tilt. I grabbed the counter. I missed. I went down. I broke my wrist and bruised 3 ribs. The hospital kept me for 2 days. When I came home, Daniel and Renee sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I remember thinking, strangely, that it looked like a job interview, and they talked to me about my situation. "Dad," Daniel said, leaning forward with his hands folded, "we've been thinking. You need more dedicated care than we can give you here. We want you to be safe. You had a serious fall," Renee said. Her voice was soft in the way that knives are sometimes thin. "We're worried about you." I looked at my son. "I'm fine, Daniel. I tripped. The glasses were too high." "It's more than that," he said. "Your balance has been off for months, and with your knee and your blood pressure." "I manage my blood pressure, Jean." Renee placed her perfectly manicured hand on the table between us. Not on my hand, just on the table between us, like a border marker. "We found a very nice place. It has activities, other people your age, medical staff on site. They wanted to put me in a home." I looked at my son for a long moment. He didn't look away, but his eyes were somewhere behind mine. He wasn't really seeing me. I said, "Let me think about it. What I meant was, please, give me a reason not to feel completely alone right now." He didn't give me one. 3 weeks after that conversation, Daniel came to me with what he called a compromise. He was smiling. Warm, almost the way he used to smile when he was young and wanted something. "Dad," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed, "I've been thinking. You've been through so much. Mom's passing, the fall, the adjustment period. I think what you really need is rest, real rest, time in nature, time to heal." I looked at him. "What are you suggesting? There's a cabin," he said. "Up in the mountains. I rented it for 2 weeks. Just for you. Clean air, beautiful views, a fireplace, a little porch. You can read, sleep, walk if you feel up to it. No stress, no noise, just peace." I have to tell you honestly, a part of me was moved by this. A part of me thought, maybe I've been wrong. Maybe he still cares. Maybe this is him trying. That sounds nice. I said carefully, "It'll be good for your heart," he said. And he patted my knee, and for a moment he was my Danny again. We drove up on a Saturday morning. The cabin was genuinely beautiful. I want to give it that. It was nestled between pine trees, with a mountain range visible from the porch, and a narrow trail that wound down toward a river below. The air tasted different up there, cleaner, older somehow. Daniel helped me carry my bags inside. He showed me how the heating worked, where the firewood was stacked, how to reach the nearest neighbor if I needed anything. He'd stocked the refrigerator. He'd left books on the table, not the kinds I read, but the intention was there. "I'll come back for you in 2 weeks," he said, standing at the door. "Rest, Dad, you've earned it." He hugged me, and I hugged him back, tightly, like I used to when he was small, and had bad dreams, and came to my bedside in the dark. "Thank you, son," I said. He left, and I stood on the porch and watched the taillights of his car disappear down the mountain road. The first 3 days were actually peaceful. I sat on the porch in the mornings with coffee. I watched the mountains change color as the light shifted. I read Patricia's old letters that I'd brought with me. I always carried a small bundle of them. I slept long and without dreaming. My body started to unknot itself. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been, living in Daniel's house, always bracing for the next small slight, always trying to be smaller and quieter and less present. Up there in the mountains, I could breathe at full capacity again. On the 4th day, I discovered the path. It ran from the back of the cabin, through a dense grove of pines, and opened up onto a ridge that overlooked the valley below. It was steep in places, rocky in others. There was a section near the end of the ridge, I'd call it a natural overlook, where the ground dropped off sharply. A cliff edge, essentially. The kind of place you could stand and feel very small and very alive at the same time. I stood there for a while that afternoon, with the wind in my face, thinking about Patricia, thinking about Daniel, thinking about the strange shape my life had taken. I felt something settle inside me, something almost like acceptance. On the 6th day, I realized I'd left my reading glasses in Daniel's car. Now, those glasses were important. Without them, I couldn't read. And the book I'd brought, A History of the American West that I'd been working through for 2 months, had reached a chapter I'd been looking forward to. Small thing, you might say. Just glasses. But at my age, when reading is one of your chief pleasures, losing your glasses is losing something real. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I called again the next morning. He texted back, "Busy this week, Dad. Try to manage without them. I'll bring them when I come to get you." That was a week away. I decided, after a day of squinting at the pages and giving myself a headache, that I would drive down myself. The car I'd been allowed to bring was sitting right outside. The drive to Daniel's house was only about 40 minutes. I could go, get the glasses, come back, be home before dinner. I checked the weather, clear skies. I started the car. I didn't call ahead. I should tell you that. I didn't call and say I was coming. I simply drove. In my mind, it was simple. I would ring the bell. Renee would answer with her thin smile. I'd get my glasses, and I'd drive back. Simple. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed Daniel's car in the driveway, which surprised me. He'd said he was busy. There was another car, too, one I didn't immediately recognize. Dark blue, large. I let myself in through the back. I still had a key, though I sometimes wondered if they'd forgotten that. The house was quiet. The grandchildren, I figured, were at school. I moved toward the kitchen, toward the little bowl by the door where Renee kept spare items from pockets and bags. I thought Daniel might have dropped the glasses there. I heard voices, coming from the living room. I stopped moving, not because I was trying to eavesdrop. I stopped because I heard my own name. "Jean is fine up there," he's comfortable. That was Daniel's voice. And then another voice, a man I didn't recognize. Measured, professional, sounding. And you're confident he's not going to contest any of it. He doesn't even know what there is to contest. Daniel said. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Something stripped of the warmth I'd always assumed was underneath, even when it wasn't showing. He's old, he's a little confused, he had a fall, that's all in the medical records. Renee's voice, he thinks the cabin trip was a gift. A pause. And then, low laughter. Not mean laughter, exactly. Casual laughter. The kind people do when they're completely comfortable with what they're saying. I stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, and I did not breathe. The property, the man said. The house he owns outright. That's the main asset. Yes, Daniel said. And the accounts. Mom had life insurance. It all passed to him. He hasn't done anything with it. Just sits there. And your name does primary on the estate documents. We're having that updated, Renee said smoothly. That's what this meeting is about. I pressed my back against the hallway wall. My heart was beating, but not in the way you might expect, not frantically, steadily, heavily, like a clock that has been running for a long time and is still running. And then Daniel said something. He said it low, almost like a thought he was letting out rather than a statement he was making. And yet the words were perfectly clear. And if he has another episode up there on the mountain, that path to the overlook is pretty exposed. He shouldn't be up there alone, really. Anything could happen. Silence. And then Renee, he won't listen. You know how stubborn he is. No, Daniel said. He won't listen. Another silence. And the man said, well, let's focus on the paperwork for now. I walked back out through the kitchen door as quietly as I had come in. I sat in my car for a long time. My hands were on the steering wheel, but I wasn't driving. I kept running it back through my mind. The words, the tone, the specific shape of what my son had said. That path to the overlook is pretty exposed. Anything could happen. I want to be honest with you here. I don't know exactly what Daniel intended by those words. I still don't know, 8 months later, whether he was speaking loosely, carelessly, or whether he was speaking about something he had actually considered. What I know is this: he was not worried about my safety. He was accounting for it, and the difference between those two things is everything. I drove back up the mountain. I sat on the porch that night until long after dark. The stars up in those mountains are extraordinary. You forget what stars actually look like when you live near city lights. Up there, they are almost aggressive in their brightness, like they are making a point. I thought about Patricia. I thought about the life she and I had built. The house we'd bought when we were 20, 8 and broke and terrified and happy. The garden she'd planted and tended for 30 years. The kitchen table where we'd eaten 10,000 meals. The bedroom where we'd held each other through illness and grief and the particular exhaustion of raising a child. We had built all of that together, and Daniel, our son, our great project, our greatest love, had apparently decided that the fruits of that life were something to be managed, to be organized, to be secured before the old man got any more inconvenient or expensive. I could have called the police. I thought about it, but what would I say? My son made a comment about a cliff path. There was nothing concrete, nothing provable, just a conversation in a house where I had no right to be standing in the hallway listening. I could have called a lawyer. I thought about that too, but I am not a man who leads with confrontation. I never have been. Patricia used to say that my greatest strength was my patience. You're like a river, Jeannie, she said once. You go around the rock, and eventually the rock wears down. I decided to be a river. I decided not to fall off any cliff. And I decided that my son, when everything was said and done, was going to regret the night he had that meeting in his living room. But not because I punished him, because the truth was going to be there, waiting for him, when he finally had the courage to see it. The next morning, I made some phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a man named Robert Caldwell, who I had worked with for 15 years and who I trusted completely. I told him I needed to review and revise my estate documents immediately. I told him I wanted everything in order before the end of the week. Robert is a quiet man, precise. He asked me a few careful questions. "Are you under any pressure, Jean?" "Yes," I said. For myself, I should have done this a long time ago. The second call was to my niece, Carol. She is my younger sister's daughter, a woman of about 50 now, and we had always been close. She has a good heart, and she'd been worried about me since Patricia passed. I told her I needed to meet with her when I came back from the cabin. I told her it was important. She said, "Uncle Gene, are you okay?" I said, "I'm going to be." The third call was harder. It was to Marcus, my 10-year-old grandson. I know you might wonder why I called a child, but Marcus is not like most 10-year-olds. He is quiet and observant and old in a way that some children simply are. He had his mother's sharpness, and I'd always hoped some of my patience. I called him on the little phone Daniel had given him for his birthday. "Grandpa Gene." He answered immediately, and the sound of his voice was like water when you're thirsty. "Hey, buddy," I said. "Are you okay up in the cabin? Dad said you were resting." "I am resting," I said. "Marcus, I want to tell you something." "Okay, okay. Oh. Whatever happens in the next few weeks, whatever you see or hear, I want you to know that I love you. You and your sister. Nothing changes that. Nothing ever will." A pause. "Then, Grandpa, are you scared?" I thought about that for a moment. "No," I said, "not anymore." What I hadn't told Daniel in that hallway, and what I hadn't told Renee, and what I hadn't told the man in the suit with the professional voice and the paperwork, was that I had updated my estate documents 18 months ago, after Patricia died. When I moved into Daniel's house, I had a moment of clarity that surprised even me. A voice inside that said, "You are grieving, and you are vulnerable, and you should be careful." I had gone to see Robert before I moved a single box into Daniel's spare room. I had reorganized everything, the house, the accounts, the life insurance, everything Patricia and I had built together. It was not going to Daniel, not because I didn't love him. I did love him. I always would. That is not a feeling you can simply choose to stop having. But because something in me had whispered, "Wait, watch, understand first," I had listened to that whisper. The estate was reorganized into a trust. The house was placed in that trust to be managed by Robert. Funds from the accounts were distributed to a set of specific beneficiaries. Carol and her children, a scholarship foundation in Patricia's name at the local university, a small church we had attended for 40 years, and which had shown up with food and prayers when Patricia was dying. Daniel was included. Of course he was included. He was my son, but he was not the primary. He was not the controller. And none of it, not a single document, not a single number, could be changed without my explicit written authorization and a second signatory. What he had been meeting with that man about, in that living room, was a closed door. He just didn't know it yet. Daniel came to get me exactly 2 weeks after dropping me off. He arrived in the late morning. He came up the porch steps with a smile and a bag of groceries, thought we'd have lunch up here before heading back down. He said, like a man auditioning for a role. I sat in the porch chair and watched him. I smiled back. "You look good, Dad," he said, studying me. Something flickered behind his eyes. Maybe he'd expected me to look worse. Maybe he'd expected me to have spent 2 weeks alone on a mountain eating poorly and worrying and declining. "The mountain air suits you." "It does," I agreed. We ate lunch together at the small table inside the cabin. He talked about the grandchildren, about work, about a trip He and Renee were planning in the spring. He was warm and present and attentive in a way that might have fooled me 2 weeks earlier. Now I simply watched him the way you watch a fire. Aware of what it is, aware of what it can do, after lunch he said, "So should we start loading up?" "In a minute," I said. "Sit with me on the porch first." We sat in the 2 wooden chairs facing the mountain range. "Daniel," I said. "Yeah, Dad, I want you to know something." He turned to look at me, and his face was open, receptive, the face of a good son receiving wisdom. "I know," I said simply. He blinked. "Know what?" "About the meeting, about the man with the estate paperwork, about the plan." The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever sat inside. His face did something complicated. Several things, actually, moving through quickly confusion, then calculation, then something that might have been fear. "Dad, I came back for my glasses," I said. 8 days ago, I let myself in through the back. I heard everything." He opened his mouth. "I'm not angry, Daniel," I said, "and here is the thing, and I want you to hear this carefully. I meant it. I was not angry. I was sad. I was deeply, profoundly sad in the way you can only be sad about something you loved very much. I'm not angry. I'm just tired. Dad, let me finish." I said it gently but firmly, the way I used to when he was small and heading somewhere I couldn't let him go. "I'm not going to tell you who you are or what you've become. That's not my job anymore. You're a grown man, and you'll have to figure that out yourself. But I want you to know 2 things. He was very still. "First, I took care of everything a long time ago. My estate, my finances, the house your mother and I built. It's all organized exactly the way I want it organized. Robert has everything in order. You can call him if you want, but I'll tell you now, there's nothing to renegotiate." Something left his face. I watched it go. "Second," I said, and my voice got quieter, "your mother loved you more than she loved anything in this world. More than the garden she tended for 30 years. More than the house. More than the money. More than me, even on certain days, and I was okay with that because I understood it. She would sit up at night sometimes when you were sick as a child, and she would just watch you breathe. Just to make sure. She did that until you were 12 years old." I paused. "I want you to think about that." His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. "I'm going to be fine, son," I said. "I always have been." I stood up, picked up my bag, walked to his car. He followed, eventually. We drove down the mountain in silence. 3 weeks later, I moved into a small apartment, a proper one that I chose myself, with a porch that caught the morning sun and a bookshelf for my history books, and a kitchen where I could make my own coffee at whatever time I chose. Carol helped me move. Her children helped carry boxes. Marcus and Sophie came over the first weekend, and we ordered pizza, and they slept on the pull-out sofa. And in the morning, I made pancakes, and nobody sighed. Daniel called. 2 weeks after I moved out. I answered. He didn't speak for a moment. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, "Dad, just that, just the word, I'm here, son." I said, "I don't know how to." He stopped. Started again. "I don't know what happened to me. I don't know when I started." He stopped again. "I'm sorry." I did not rush to tell him it was all right. Because some apologies need to be sat with before they're answered. That is respect. Real respect. The kind that doesn't rush to make uncomfortable things comfortable before they've done their work. After a moment, I said, "I know you are." We spoke for a little while, not about the cabin or the meeting or the cliff path. We spoke about Marcus and Sophie. We spoke about a baseball game Daniel and I had gone to together when he was 8 years old, and it rained so hard we huddled under a program and ate soggy hot dogs and laughed until we couldn't see. When we said goodbye, there was something in the air between us that had not been there in a very long time. Not resolution, but the possibility of it. That was enough for me. I am 71 years old. I have worked with these hands since I was 14. I have built things that outlasted my own intentions, and torn down things I wish I'd saved. I have loved people with everything I had, and I have been let down by some of them, and I have let down some of them in return. This is what I know now, that perhaps I didn't know fully before. Silence is not weakness. I stayed silent through insult after insult in that house. I made myself smaller and quieter and less present. And I want to say clearly, that was not weakness. That was patience. That was observation. That was me waiting to understand before I acted. But silence also has a limit. There comes a point where staying silent is no longer patience. It's permission, and I had to learn the difference. When I heard my son's voice through that cabin wall, I had a choice. I could have collapsed into rage. I could have confronted him that day, in that living room, in front of the man with the paperwork. I could have caused a scene that everyone would have remembered for all the wrong reasons. Instead, I drove back up the mountain. I sat with the stars. I thought about Patricia, and I made a plan not for revenge, but for clarity. There is a difference between revenge and truth. Revenge wants to hurt. Truth simply wants to be seen. I chose truth, and truth did what it always does eventually. It did enough. If you are a parent watching this story right now, I want to say this to you. You are not a burden. Your age is not an inconvenience. Your needs are not a problem to be solved. The life you've lived, the things you've built, the love you've poured into children who didn't ask to be born, but who you brought into the world and fed and protected and taught and worried about. At 2 in the morning, none of that is nothing. None of that is nothing. If you feel like you are slowly disappearing in your own family, if you are making yourself smaller to take up less space, if you are swallowing your words to keep the peace, if you are watching your children look through you rather than at you, hear me when I say this. You are still here. You still matter. Your presence is still worth something, even when someone else has decided it isn't. And if you are a son or a daughter watching this, if something in this story made you look sideways at the way you've been treating the person who raised you, I am not here to condemn you. People drift, families drift, life gets busy and finances get complicated, and old parents become inconvenient in ways that are real, not just imagined. But I want you to try something. Close your eyes and think of a specific moment with your parent, not a concept. A specific moment, a meal they cooked, a car ride, a time they showed up when you needed someone, a particular laugh, a pair of hands you know by heart. Hold that for a second. That is who they are, not the inconvenience, not the expense, not the problem. That is who they are. And one day, one ordinary, unremarkable day that you will not recognize as the last day until it is already gone, they won't be here anymore. And you will stand in a room that used to hold their voice, and the silence will be enormous, and you will understand, finally, what you had. Don't wait for that day. Don't wait. I still talk to Daniel. We are not where we were, not the father and son of 20 years ago, laughing over baseball and rainy hot dogs. But we are talking, and sometimes that's the start of something. Marcus calls me every Sunday. We are working through a history of the American West together. I read him the chapters over the phone, slowly, while he asks questions that are sometimes so sharp I have to stop and think. He has his grandmother's eyes, that boy, and maybe I allow myself to hope a little of my patience. Patricia would be glad, I think. She always believed that love, if it was real, was stubborn enough to survive almost anything. I believe she was right. I believe it while I sit on my porch in the morning sun with my coffee and my glasses and my books and the quiet that nobody can take from me because I chose it for myself. I believe it with my whole heart, and that heart, this old, broken, and healed heart is still beating.